Big time fight coming up this weekend. We have a short notice replacement in the former CFFC welterweight champ Jeremiah Wells. He's going to be taking on Brazil's Warlley Alves. And Matt, if fans aren't familiar with Jeremiah Wells, this is a guy that it's a lot of fun to go back and watch some of his regional fights. You might know him at a Renzo Gracie Philly. He's a teammate of one Sean Brady. And there's a lot of great fighters out of Renzo Gracie Philly over the years, but Jeremiah Wells is one of those guys that a lot of people have been saying on the underground whisper networks, the Sean Bitters, the Nolan Kings, the whoever else is. There's a lot of big names. I just can't credit everybody, so 2 is all you'll get. But there's a lot of people that have been high on Jeremiah Wells for a very long time, that his opportunity, maybe this is a little late because he's about 34 and a half, but finally gets the opportunity to fight in the UFC. He was, like I said, champ with CFFC, and right after that, vacated his belt, signed with the UFC, was supposed to fight Miguel Baeza last year, but Baeza wasn't cleared to fight, so he's had all of this time off. His last time out there, you go back and watch it, it's against Marco Smallman, way back a year and 8 months ago was his last fight. Before that, 2 years ago against Mumia Abu De Ali, where he knocks him out, 3-1 the record, and for Smallman, 6-2. Before that, a loss to Vinicius de Jesus 2 years and 2 months ago with CS, but Vinicius de Jesus is one of those guys in the regional scene that you see on a lot of fighters' records. He's now taking on Warlley Alves, who's getting ready for Ramazan Ameev, a guy that I'm a wrestler, but all of a sudden I'm a kickboxer, and I pull my shorts down to an uncomfortable level. But for Warlley Alves, we've seen the game. I lose to really good fighters. I beat fighters that aren't in the upper tier, like top 15 level.
Covington?
Or some fighters that are on their way up, like Colby Covington. And then some nights Warlley Alves shows up, and it's like if Matt fought in the cage against Jeremiah Wells.
Yeah, pretty much. There is just a night and day version between those two versions of Warlley Alves. And for Alves, I'm going to bring up Ben Simmons. Like, it really does seem to be kind of a mental thing with him. Like, if he is 100% ready for the fight, he's a tough guy to go in there against. Like, people bring up the fact, like, for instance, Jeremiah Wells, he's a very well-rounded mixed martial artist. And I guess not to speak about Jeremiah Wells to then really give Warlley Alves the credit he deserves. Jeremiah Wells, brown belt Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like you said, trains with Sean Brady. He has training partners that can get him ready for this style of opponent. Now, it is on short notice, which isn't great, and we'll get more into that in a second, but still, there's a lot to like coming into this fight for Jeremiah Wells. I feel like the headline for this fight should still be debuting UFC fighter is somehow younger than Warlley Alves, because Warlley, how is he 30 years old? Like, that's the thing that keeps on surprising me. Every time I look at his Tapology page, I'm like, wait, he's 30.
He won the Ultimate Fighter Brazil Season 3 back in 2014 at middleweight. He beat Marcial Alessandre Jr., and then he beat Alan Jobin, Nordin Taleb, and Colby Covington.
Which is an extremely impressive win streak to go on. And the thing about Warlley Alves has always been, can his stand-up ever catch up to where his ground game is? Because at the start of his MMA career, it was just the jiu-jitsu. He didn't really have, he had the power, I guess. He just didn't really have the technique to go along with the punching power that he had. And then he was starting to put everything together. And then, of course, he loses that fight, Brad, and he's lost a few since then. And we kind of know the story. But for Warlley Alves, anybody who he grapples with, he is going to have a massive advantage with. Unless you do bring up, like, the fight against Randy Brown, which I don't know if I have an explanation for that performance. It was just odd. Like, Warlley Alves looked like he didn't want to be there. And I don't want to speculate any further than that. He just looked like he didn't want to be in there that night. And I would say nobody can submit Warlley Alves. Like, I would put one of those Matt guarantees next to it. But we have seen it be done. I will say this much, though. I don't think Jeremiah Wells can submit Warlley Alves. Can he go out there and out-wrestle him? Yes, he could be able to out-wrestle him for slight periods of this fight. Could he out-grapple him in moments and stay on top? I think he could, but the problem is we talk about that version of Warlley Alves that we have seen before. The last version of Warlley Alves that I saw in my mind's eye was great, and that's the version that I have to assume we're going to be seeing from this point moving forward, or at least that's the version that I have to go from this point out, because I have no idea what's going on between the ears of Warlley Alves. I only know what's going on inside the cage. Based on his last performance, he looked to be that guy again who was in that 25 to 15 range, who, listen, could he beat the top tier wrestlers in the division? Maybe not, but anybody else, if he could take them down, he had a really good chance to beat them. So for Warlley Alves, I feel like this is a very winnable fight for him. This is a very good fight for him to have at this stage of his career, I should say, because Jeremiah Wells, like you had said, very well-rounded, very well-respected guy, I should say, on the regional scene. So it's not like you're just beating some random guy on short notice coming in to fight Warlley Alves. So I do feel like this will still be a quality win for Alves if he can pull it off. And it's against a guy who is so well-rounded, which makes this fight so much fun.
Jeremiah Wells is one of those guys that has good wrestling, he's got decent jiu-jitsu, and he has really, really crafty and tricky striking. Like, he could throw a knee up the middle. He could cut you with an elbow. He could go in there, throw a nice crisp boxing combination, or absolutely rush the cage, get you into the clinch, take you down, and then work his own game. So for Jeremiah Wells, you like what you see on the regional scene. For Warlley Alves, again, if we go for the 5-on-in, he beat Sultan Alia back about 3 years ago. Doctor stoppage. He loses to James Krause by finish. Yikes. He beat Sergio Moraes 2 years ago. Still meant something, kind of. Loses to Randy Brown by triangle. Now, we've said this for a while with Fight Night picks. Rude boy Randy Brown was kind enough to do an interview with JHK before his last fight where he beat Alex Oliveira. Randy Brown's a sneaky fighter in this division. If he can bring everything together, he's a very special product. You saw that with the one-arm rear naked choke that he had on Oliveira's last time out. Sometimes he loses fights he shouldn't, but Randy Brown, by and large, is a good fighter. But the fight against Warlley Alves was really weird. And listen, it's enough to trust us. Go watch it.
That's what I mean, like, Randy Brown could beat Warlley Alves anyways. This is what I mean. I'm not trying to say all this to discredit what Randy Brown did that night, because it was a very impressive performance. But I'm telling you, if he fought any other version of Warlley Alves, the fight would not look that way, at least. He might knock him out. He might out-wrestle him. He might beat him in other ways. But again, I just can't stress how weird that performance is. If we've been talking about how weird his performance was against James Krause and Randy Brown, then just take our word for it.
And if you look at it for Warlley Alves, I mean, let's look at the last 3 wins. Again, Sultan Alia finishes him. Performance of the night win over Moraes. Performance of the night win over Munir Lazez, where he's a plus 200 underdog in a weird co-main event. And he picks up a huge win like that. Now, if you go back and look at that, that was on the Magny Chiesa card, which was sneaky good if you really go back. But again, it was a Wednesday, so a lot of people missed it. But overall, really big win for Warlley Alves. If you look at the odds for this one, just kind of different, I guess. I mean, you've got Alves open at minus 205. He's now minus 233. For Jeremiah Wells, open at plus 165. He's a plus 186. And if we have a look over on Tapology for those votes, holy smokes. 468 of them, 91%. Alves, 56% by knockout, 13% by submission. 9% have Wells. Everything's kind of split up, but what are you thinking?
Wells is good at a lot, but great at nothing. And that's my big issue. Well, it's the truth, though. Like, he's a well-rounded fighter. You can't specialize in everything. No one can. No one ever has. So it's not me knocking him. It's just, when you're a well-rounded fighter, you lack the specializations that a guy like Warlley Alves has. Alves on the mat, like I said, against pretty much anybody, he will have a grappling advantage against. And Wells is a good grappler, like we said, but there's levels. Like, Warlley Alves goes out there and out-grapples the majority of guys he's in there with. And if you do shoot for takedowns, you always have to know where your neck is. Because, again, I brought up the Colby Covington loss, and you did too. Like, Colby Covington... Yeah, sorry. Well, loss for Covington, win for Alves. Yeah, when he went for the takedown, though, Alves is just really smart and he's really good with the guillotine. We talked about that with Tim Elliott, how, like, Tim Elliott just has some positions he's great in, and Nick Lentz, to a certain extent, also, where Nick Lentz has that guillotine position where, listen, you might be able to out-grapple him in a lot of other places, but the guillotine is deadly. And for Warlley Alves, very similar in that way. So for Wells, he's going to be really careful on the feet against a guy who's got a ton of power, and then he can't really take his opponent down. I just don't see how Jeremiah Wells can be able to get this done. I think Warlley Alves, at the peak of his powers, is a tough fighter for really anybody in the top 20, I'd say. And here's the last thing. This is a short notice fight for Jeremiah Wells. He has had a massive time off in between his last 2 fights, and the fact that he is coming into this fight on short notice does concern me. There's guys who, like I said, in the top 25 would have trouble with Warlley Alves with a full training camp. You're asking a guy making his UFC debut on not a huge card, but I'm sure they're still going to the Octagon jitters, to beat a guy like Warlley Alves. I just think it's too much too soon.
Really tricky fight. Warlley Alves also has a teammate on this card in Raoni Barcelos, who, again, both guys coached by Pedro Rizzo, so I can't wait for it. But both of us going with Brazil's Warlley Alves to get the win. Can't wait for it. And I do think Jeremiah Wells has a really good career ahead of him in the UFC. Just a shame we get him a little bit later on in life. Similar to Carlston Harris, who came in recently with a big win over Christian Aguilera. Maybe Jeremiah Wells has a little bit of that in him. I can't wait for this fight. Big time card. Gane taking on Volkov in the main event. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. And as we always say, let's get into it.